Hello everyone and welcome back to Coach Craig Sports. Today is Tuesday, which means it is the waiver wire episode. So if you were with me last year, you kind of know how this worked. If you were not with me last year, if you're new to the channel, I definitely appreciate you tuning in. Definitely appreciate the support. But the way the waiver wire episode works in general is these are guys that are under 50% rostered on both ESPN and Yahoo. So if they were over 50% on either site, they were cut off the list. But these are guys that I think are either worth picking up on waivers or guys that you should be looking out for in general. We're going to start off with the quarterback position. And first off is Ben Roethlisberger. This is a guy that I think you have a good chance of streaming this week. Obviously, Ben Roethlisberger has those home road splits where he's much better at home than he is on the road. This is a home game. It is against the Las Vegas Raiders, who have a questionable defense. We saw them last night. They gave up 27 points. They looked a little bit better at times, especially rushing the passer, so that's definitely an improvement. And we all know the Pittsburgh Steelers line isn't the greatest, but the way to neutralize that pass rush is getting the ball out quick, and Ben Roethlisberger does that about as well as anyone in the league. So in week one, he was 18 out of 32, 188 yards, nothing inspiring there. 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions, had 5 yards rushing, 14.02 points. This is 6 point per passing touchdown format. So he's rostered in 38% of ESPN leagues, 39% of Yahoo leagues. So a good chance that he's still out there. A guy that I would do like in a favorable streaming matchup for week 2 if you need a streaming quarterback. Next up is Jameis Winston. He made my list last week, that week 1 waivers before the season actually started. Looked pretty good week 1. 14 out of 20, 148 yards, 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 37 rushing yards, 39.62 points in week 1. 30% rostered on ESPN and 44% on Yahoo. Goes against the Carolina Panthers in week 2, so it should be a favorable matchup once again. And, Jameis Winston at this point in time, pick him up, see what he does. You can stream him if you need to this week in a favorable matchup, or you can just kind of pivot back and forth with him and another quarterback streaming which one has the favorable matchup on the week. It does not sound like a bad idea to me, but I definitely have a lot of faith in Sean Payton, and I do like what I saw out of Jameis Winston in week 1. Then last but not least, for my third quarterback for the week, it's Mac Jones. And the most impressive thing out of his stat line is he threw the ball 39 times in this game, and this was not a high-scoring game. They weren't trailing by a lot or anything like that, so it's not like he had to throw the ball a ton. But allowing a rookie quarterback to throw the ball 39 times shows me that Bill Belichick trusts this guy. And the fact that Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson both fumbled, it probably helped him trust him a little bit more. The Patriots would have won this game if Damian Harris does not fumble that ball, but that's a whole nother story. And Mac Jones was very, very efficient, 29 out of 39, very good day there, 281 yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions, 0 rushing yards. He didn't run the ball at all. You're looking at a guy, he's kind of like a Kirk Cousins, this guy that's not going to kill you. He's not going to overwhelm you on a week, but in good matchups, you can definitely play him. 17.24 points in week 1. That's a solid, respectable week. It's not a guy that's going to win you the week, but he's not going to lose you the week. If he gets up to 2 touchdowns, that's a performance that you need in your lineup. That's going to help you, but it's not going to win you the week. But once again, it's going to help you. And he's about 25% rostered on both ESPN and Yahoo. Goes against the Jets this week, who have a terrible cornerback unit. They are fairly decent against the run. They limited Christian McCaffrey, at least in the running game. So this could be a game where Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson get shut down on the ground. Patriots are forced to go to the air, which once again, it looks like they don't have a problem doing if they allowed him to throw the ball 39 times in week 1. Look for Mac Jones to have a very, very good week 2 and a guy that you can stream in week 2. And, keep on the end of your bench, play in favorable matchups. Could have a ton of upside throughout the season. Next, we'll move over to the running back position, and probably the most popular name this week is going to be Elijah Mitchell. Raheem Mostert got hurt week 1, hurt his knee, expected to be out for 8 weeks now. Trey Sermon was inactive week 1. We'll see if he plays week 2. I assume he plays week 2. JaMychal Hasty's there as well, but even in this game, JaMychal Hasty barely played. He barely did anything. I think he only had 1 carry. Elijah Mitchell played on 64% of snaps week 1. 19 carries, 104 yards, 1 touchdown. He did not have a target in this game, so that's kind of notable. 49ers are not very well known for throwing to their running backs in general, so it's probably not something you're going to count on there, but 2-3 targets a week, maybe 2 receptions, that would be an expectation. He was a fairly good pass catcher in college. He had one of the highest yards per reception among college football running backs, so that is something that he can do. 16.4 points in week 1, 4% rostered on ESPN, 10% on Yahoo. Goes against the Philadelphia Eagles in week 2, who we did see give up some rushing yards to the Atlanta Falcons, whether it was Cordero Patterson or Mike Davis, and neither of those two guys are anything to write home about either. I know Elijah Mitchell, 6th-round draft capital, but he could be the guy for the San Francisco running game, and if that's the case, this is definitely a guy that you want on your team. And I do apologize because typically I go through, if you're in a fab league, what I would typically spend on these guys for the quarterback position. You're looking at like 2 to 3% of your budget. I don't try to invest a lot in quarterback overall in the year, but Jameis Winston, Mac Jones, if you want to pay up a little bit for those guys, definitely could do it because they could be guys that are going to help you streaming week to week. And then Ben Roethlisberger, just a 1 to 2% type of guy because he's a streamer this week, and then you're probably going to drop him anyways. But when you're talking about Elijah Mitchell, this is probably a guy that you want to spend about 30% on your budget. Really just depends if you're a run-needy team or not. But keep in mind, Trey Sermon is here. He's got the higher draft capital. We'll see if he's actually further down on the depth chart or not. There was rumors, he missed curfew and he was inactive because of that, or because he didn't play special teams. We'll just have to see what the case is in week 2. It's kind of hard to trust the San Francisco 49ers backfield as it does shift over time. So investing anything more than 30% would be kind of my breaking point because it's still week 1. It's still early on the year. You see guys like this kind of break off week 1, and like last year, Malcolm Brown, and people invest heavily in them, and then they just don't pan out for the whole season. But Elijah Mitchell is definitely a guy that's got some upside. Then for the second name on this list, it's Mark Ingram, playing on 46% of snaps. As a Houston Texans fan, this really surprised me that he got 26 carries because, Mark Ingram's about 32 years old now. He wasn't too efficient on those carries, as you see with the 85 yards. He got about 3 yards a run on most runs, it was looking like, when he was playing. 1 touchdown. He only had 1 target in this game. 14.5 points. Rostered in 13% of ESPN leagues, 21% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against Cleveland this week, so probably not the best matchup in the world. He's probably a guy I'd be willing to spend like 5% of my fab budget on. Stash him on my end of my bench and see if this trend kind of continues. But it's hard to trust just because they had that 3-headed monster for the Houston Texans. David Johnson wasn't involved too much week 1. Philip Lindsay, he was there. All 3 guys actually ended up scoring a touchdown. We even saw Philip Lindsay line up in kind of like a slot wide receiver, and they do some reverses and stuff with him at times too. So Tim Kelly's being very creative as the offensive coordinator for the Texans. We'll see how all 3 of these guys' usage kind of shakes out over the next couple of weeks. But at this point in time, about 5% of my budget is kind of my max where I would spend on Mark Ingram. Then we probably have to talk about somebody that a lot of people probably don't want to talk about. It's Le'Veon Bell. Did not play week 1. He was obviously signed to the Ravens practice squad. We've seen Tyson Williams have a very nice game last night. Latavius Murray was essentially a dud other than the touchdown he had. This could be a crowded backfield. Le'Veon Bell is rostered in 48% of ESPN leagues, 46% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against the Kansas City Chiefs in week 2, so this would actually be a revenge game. And after those comments that he kind of fired off for Andy Reid, maybe he's got a little bit of fighting words. Honestly, we don't know if he's going to be on the active roster for week 2 or not, but a guy that's interesting to stash. We know he has had talent in the past. He's been effective in the past. He was not terrible last year in limited usage by, yards per carry, yards per reception, stuff like that. I think there's definitely a role for him on this Ravens team, and we did see Lamar Jackson look to check down to the running back position a little more often last night, so maybe that's a good sign for things to come for Le'Veon Bell. I like his skill set and what he could provide to this team overall. But Le'Veon Bell overall, it's probably a guy that you only want to spend like 2% of your fab budget on, 3%. Just kind of wait and see what he does. Next up is a similar player, and Wayne Gallman did not play in week 1. Obviously, he signed with the Falcons kind of late before week 1, so 9% rostered on ESPN, 3% on Yahoo. Goes against Tampa Bay this week, so this is now a matchup you want to play him in regardless. Plus, you obviously don't want to trust him, coming into the team, still learning everything. But there is a chance that he could overtake Mike Davis at some point this season. So that's a guy that's worth investing, probably about 3 to 5% of your fab budget in, seeing how it plays out. And you could potentially have a league winner in Wayne Gallman here. Just keep in mind, it's going to be a slow ride. It might take 3 to 4 weeks before we really see him come on in this offense. But the thing that I really liked out of the game for the Falcons, Matt Ryan wasn't very good, and they tried to run the ball. So if Matt Ryan's looking like he's regressing once again, which I kind of predicted all off season, they could lean a little bit more on this run game, which favors Wayne Gallman, and that seems like something Arthur Smith wants to do in general. Then next up is Tony Jones Jr. He played 35% of snaps. This is probably going to be a popular guy on waivers. 10 carries, 50 yards, 1 target, 1 reception for 3 yards. 6.3 points in week 1. Rostered 19% of ESPN leagues, 23% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against Carolina Panthers this week, so it's a favorable matchup for him. I am not super excited about Tony Jones Jr. Yes, he's got that Latavius Murray role. He had 11 carries, 12 total touches in this game. In a blowout, like Alvin Kamara wasn't even on the field at the end of the game, and Tony Jones Jr. still didn't do much. So this is not a guy that's going to help your team unless Alvin Kamara goes down. So he's just a high priority handcuff in that case. And then the fact that Alvin Kamara played 73% of snaps, and then the game was a blowout, so he wasn't playing at the end. So this is kind of telling me Alvin Kamara is probably going to be on the field for 80% of snaps, which means Tony Jones Jr. probably going to be on the field for like 25% of snaps most weeks. So more often than not, he's not going to help your team. Just more of a high priority handcuff at this point in time. Guy that I'm only investing 1 to 2% of my fab budget, if that, this week. And honestly, I think he's probably a guy that you're better off letting somebody else grab him. Then we move over to the wide receivers. We're going to start with Sterling Shepard just because he had essentially the best week out of all the wide receivers that are going to be on this list. Played on 95% of the snaps. That's something good. That's something we look for. He's out there more often than not, which is especially good since he lined up in the slot most of the time. 9 targets, so he had more targets than Kenny Galladay. That could be something that favors him. It takes a little bit of pressure off him now that Kenny Galladay's out there. They're getting the best corner. But he had 9 targets, 7 receptions, 113 yards, and a touchdown against Bryce Callahan of the Denver Broncos, who is one of the better slot corners in the entire NFL. Keep this in mind. Sterling Shepard could be a guy that we're looking back a couple weeks from now and we're like, oh, wow, this guy's a top 30 wide receiver for fantasy football. He ended up with 24.3 points in week 1, rostering about 30% of ESPN leagues, 39% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against the Washington football team in week 2. They have 2 fairly good corners in Kendall Fuller and William Jackson. Like I already mentioned, Sterling Shepard often plays in the slot. The Washington football team does not have a bona fide slot corner guy that's really good there. So this could be another good week for Sterling Shepard. Daniel Jones obviously trusts him, so if he's in trouble, he's going to look for Sterling Shepard more often than not. William Jackson's probably going to be on Kelly and Galladay once again, which pretty much is going to eliminate him from the game plan. Don't really trust Darius Slayton. Evan Ingram, who knows if he's back this week. Kadarius Toney got outsnapped by CJ Board, so we're not worried about him. Sterling Shepard's looking like a pretty good play here this week and potentially in the future. So typically, wide receivers, I like to spend 5 to 8% of my fab budget on in general on any given week. Sometimes it's closer to 3%, sometimes it's 12%. I feel like Sterling Shepard's probably a guy that you can spend that 10 to 12% on because he has some future upside built in as well. Then next up is Nelson Agholor. Played on 85% of snaps. Another good thing there. We're looking for that high snap count. 7 targets, which was really good considering Mac Jones threw the ball 39 times. So it's probably about an 18% target share, which honestly doesn't sound that good. But when you're competing for targets with these 2 tight ends that they do have, Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, and then Jacoby Myers underneath, it could definitely be worse. Then James White is kind of that dump off back out of the backfield. So that's a respectable target share. 5 receptions, 72 yards, 1 touchdown. Goes against the Jets in week 2. Like I said with Mac Jones, it's going to be a favorable matchup. He's either going to line up against Bryce Hall or Brandon Eichels, and give me that matchup pretty much all day. I know everybody kind of hates Nelson Agholor from his Philadelphia Eagles day, but you got to give this guy some props. He really came out last year. He played well, and we've seen Nelson Agholor kind of blossom into this wide receiver that the Eagles hoped he was going to be when they took him in the first round out of USC. 18.2 points in week 1, about 33% rostered on both ESPN and Yahoo. This is a guy probably that 5 to 8% of your fab budget range because I think he does have some upside, especially if Mac Jones is going to be throwing the ball 35 plus times a game. Somebody's got to catch the ball. It's going to be Nelson Agholor. It's going to be Jonnu Smith. It's going to be James White. It's going to be Jacoby Myers. Yeah, they're going to split it up. But he's still going to have some value as a low-end wide receiver flex play on a weekly basis. Then we get into the guys that are probably more like stashes. There's a couple other guys on this list that we'll talk about more that could be weekly plays as well. First off is Terrace Marshall Jr. Played 53% of snaps, 6 targets, 3 receptions, 26 yards. a pretty uninspiring stat line. 56.1 points in week 1. Roster in 24% of ESPN leagues, 20% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against New Orleans in week 2. He's probably going to line up against Gardner Johnson in the slot since Terrace Marshall did play quite a bit there. A very, very physical defensive back. We'll see how that matchup shakes out for Terrace Marshall Jr., but it could be one that, goes in his favor. And this is a guy probably, I'd say, 3 to 6% of your fab budget is a guy you're stashing, put on the end of your bench. But he did out-target Robbie Anderson in this game, which is obviously something of note. And then if the Panthers are in a negative game strip, Terrace Marshall Jr. could have a nice day. But overall, just a great guy to stash in general. See what he does. Not a guy that you're going to play right away. Then we have another rookie in Rondale Moore. He only ended up playing 29% of snaps, 20 total snaps. In those 20 snaps, he had 5 targets, 4 receptions for 68 yards. That is very, very good production for 20 snaps. Lined up in the backfield twice as well. 10.8 points in week 1. Rostered in 22% of ESPN leagues, 27% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against the Vikings in week 2, which is a very favorable matchup, by the way. And this is a game that the Cardinals were winning pretty handily. So they didn't have to go 4 wide receivers. They didn't have to throw the ball a ton. This was a bad game script for Rondale Moore in general. There's going to be better weeks coming ahead. AJ Green's probably not going to be able to go out there 90% of snaps every single week. That's going to favor guys like Christian Kirk. It's going to favor guys like Rondale Moore. If he gets up closer to 50% of snaps and maintains this production, this is going to be a guy that's going to win you weeks in PPR leagues. This is a guy that should be on the end of your bench, a priority stash as of right now. So with that priority stash tag, I give him that 5 to 8% of your fab budget because this is a guy that could help you win leagues later on in the season. Then we got to go to his teammate Christian Kirk, played on 57% of snaps. Same thing I talked about with Rondale Moore. They were in a good game script. They were winning the game. They didn't have to have these two guys who play the slot out there on the field a lot. There's going to be games where they're going to have to throw the ball more. There's going to be games where they're trailing. These two guys are going to be out on the field more often. And Christian Kirk had a heck of a day just being on the field for 57% of snaps. 5 targets, 5 receptions, crazy production there, obviously. 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. He is that deep threat. Last year, Christian Kirk was a viable boom-bust wide receiver 3 flex play type of option early on in the season. Kyler Murray hurt his shoulder and just kind of went downhill from there. So he's somebody to keep an eye out on. 24 points in week 1. This is a guy probably 2 to 3% of your fab budget because I don't see it maintaining over the course of the season. But we never know. This offense is explosive. They're going to throw the ball. And if Kyler Murray stays healthy, it could be a good year for Christian Kirk. Maybe that breakout year we all been waiting for. Rostered in 5% of ESPN leagues, 14% of Yahoo leagues, goes against that same good Vikings matchup in week 2. Then next up is Zach Pascal, who had a heck of a game in week 1. Played on 91% of snaps. This is a guy that's out there on the field more often than not. I believe last year he led the Colts in snaps overall. Second on the team in targets, I believe, the last 2 years as well. So a very, very underrated player. He's always healthy. He's always out there on the field. And this dude blocks. That's one of the reasons that he's always out there on the field. And yes, you can say, well, blocking doesn't help you in fantasy football. But if they call a run play and he's in there to block and then they check out of it into a pass play, that's going to help him too. That gives him an opportunity. So we got 5 targets, 4 receptions, 43 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So he had 20.3 points in week 1, only rostered in 3% of ESPN leagues, 1% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against the Los Angeles Rams, who have a very good defense in week 2. Here's the thing, though. They got Darius Williams and Jalen Ramsey on the outside. Zach Pascal primarily lines up in the slot and goes against David Long Jr., who is the slot corner for the Los Angeles Rams now after Troy Hill left. So that's their weak spot. Zach Pascal could have a very nice week in week 2. This is a guy that you could potentially stream if you need to. He's another guy that's going to be about 3 to 5% of my fab budget. Not a guy that you're probably going to have to spend up too much for, but could offer you some weekly upside as well. Then probably one of my favorite players from last season, if you guys were on my channel at all last season, you heard about Tim Patrick almost on a weekly basis for waivers. He was always under 50% rostered, it seemed like. Great DFS play most of the time as well. So Tim Patrick, week 1, played 70% of snaps. This was with Jerry Jeudy starting the game too. Obviously, Jerry Jeudy got injured during this game, which makes Tim Patrick an even better option now. He had 4 targets, 4 receptions, 39 yards, and 1 touchdown. He is that red zone threat for the Denver Broncos. We saw it last season. Yes, Cortland Sutton could take away from that a little bit. Noah Fant should have some touchdown regression in the positive, but we'll just have to see if it happens or not. 13.9 points in week 1. Roster on 1% of ESPN leagues, 2% of Yahoo leagues, goes against the Jacksonville Jaguars in week 2, which should be a very favorable matchup. Yes, KJ Hamler is there too, but he was the 4th wide receiver on the depth chart. I believe he only played about 36% of snaps, even with Jerry Jeudy going down. I expect him to be more of the slot wide receiver with Jerry Jeudy out. Tim Patrick's still going to play on the outside, and don't be surprised if he plays 80% of snaps in week 2. Then last but not least, at the wide receiver position, we got KJ Osborn, who was actually a guy that I was kind of hyping up prior to the season, say could be a sneaky pickup in dynasty leagues even, because he was only rostered in about 2% of dynasty leagues, which was kind of insane when you think about him being the wide receiver 3 for the Vikings. But traditionally, the Vikings have used more 2 tight end sets, not 3 wide receiver sets, so the wide receiver 3 for the Vikings has not been too productive overall. Irv Smith is out now. Irv Smith kind of played a hybrid role at tight end and wide receiver. They used him out wide. They used him in the slot a ton. Vikings coaching staff had hinted to using 3 wide receivers more. He played 81% of snaps week 1. 9 targets, 7 receptions, 76 yards. That's 4.6 points in week 1. This is a guy that was viable to play week 1 if you needed to. Keep in mind this, though. They were trailing this game to the Bengals most of the game, so he was on the field more often than not because they were playing catch-up. On a weekly basis, he's probably going to be more closer to that, 55 to 65% of snaps. Still a guy that could be useful, and then if Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson were to go down, his value would get a boost like big time. So he's a guy that I want on the end of my bench stash. See what he does the next couple of weeks as well. Probably a 3% of your fab budget type of guy. He's literally available in almost every single league. For KJ Osborn, if you're in a league with a bunch of people that don't really follow fantasy football too hardcore, this is a guy that you can probably get for free off of waivers. But I'd still feel comfortable putting, that up to 3% of your fab budget on him. Not a high priority on my list, but a guy that you can stash, see what he does, and potentially help your team down the road. And then he goes against the Cardinals in week 2. The Cardinals do not have the best cornerback group. This could be a little bit of a high-scoring game, so maybe he's even viable week 2. Probably not somebody I roll out there and trust myself, but it just kind of is what it is at this point in time. Then next up, we have the tight end position. We got Cole Kmet first off, and he played 74% of snaps in week 1, 7 targets, 5 receptions, 42 yards. That resulted in 9.2 fantasy points in week 1. Rostered in 25% of ESPN leagues, 34% of Yahoo leagues, so there's a good chance that he's available out there. We saw Jimmy Graham be pretty much useless in this game. He might get some red zone targets. He might play on the outside just a little bit, but not really worried about him at this point in time. Goes against the Cincinnati Bengals in week 2, which should be a favorable matchup, even though we didn't see them give up a ton of points to the tight end position for Minnesota. But it's also important to note that the tight ends for the Minnesota Vikings are Tyler Conklin and Chris Herndon. They are not world beaters by any means. Cole Kmet was a second-round draft pick. This is a guy that's going to have some upside on the week and on the season. So he's probably a guy I'm comfortable spending probably 3 to 5% of my fab budget on. Don't try to invest too heavily in tight ends myself, because either I have a good tight end that I'm comfortable playing every week, or I'm trying to stream the position where I don't want to be too heavily invested in one guy overall. But Cole Kmet could be a guy that you could potentially play for the rest of the season. Then, speaking of another guy that could potentially be a play for the rest of the season, we got Adam Trautman. Played on 82% of snaps. I know everybody's going to be excited for Jawan Johnson because he had the 2 touchdowns. He caught 3 passes for 21 yards on his only 3 targets. He only played 19% of snaps, which I believe was 12 snaps in total. That is crazy production. That is not going to last. Don't fall for the trap. Adam Trautman appears to be the safe play for New Orleans. 6 targets, 3 receptions, 18 yards. Uninspiring stat line week 1. 4.8 points in week 1. Rostered in 5% of ESPN leagues, 11% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against Carolina in week 2, which should be a favorable matchup as well. Jameis Winston targeted the tight end position 9 times in this game. That's very, very relevant because he only threw the ball 20 times. That was 45% of the time he targeted the tight end position. 6 out of 9 of those targets went to Adam Trautman. Adam Trautman has the potential to have a very good season. Obviously, he's coming back from that ankle injury still. We didn't even know if he was going to play week 1 initially, and he still played 82% of snaps. This is only going to get better. So Adam Trautman, probably like Cole Kmet, 3 to 5% of your fab budget, a guy that you could potentially play for the rest of the season. Then we got Dalton Schultz, probably not the sexiest name. This is one for a streaming matchup or a guy that you could kind of play for a couple weeks until Blake Jarwin comes back, breaks out. He played on 68% of snaps week 1, 6 targets, 6 receptions, 45 yards, 10.5 points in week 1. If you have 10.5 points out of your tight end, you're probably doing all right. He's only rostered in 1% of ESPN and Yahoo leagues. He goes against the Chargers in week 2, which are not notably great at covering the tight end unless you put Derwin James on him. I don't think they're going to put Derwin James on him. That seems kind of like a waste of Derwin James. So don't be surprised if Dalton Schultz has an impact on this game for this week, especially with Michael Gallup out. There's targets to go around. Dalton Schultz could be a sneaky play this week and maybe potentially for the next couple of weeks as well. So being a streaming tight end, he's probably a guy I'm only want to spend like 1 or 2% of my fab budget on, but I think he's definitely a guy that could help you out, especially this week. Then next up, we got Pharaoh Brown. Most of you are probably asking, who the hell is Pharaoh Brown? Pharaoh Brown is the starting tight end for the Houston Texans. He went to the University of Oregon, undrafted free agent because of injuries in college. Very high star recruit coming out of high school. He has some talent behind him. Kind of got buried on the Cleveland Browns depth chart for a couple of years. Played with the Texans last year. He was leading the Texans tight ends in snaps later on in the year last year before he had a concussion. He dealt with some COVID this offseason. Came into the preseason, just getting caught up. Still played 76% of the snaps in this game. 5 targets, 4 receptions, 67 yards, and a great one-handed catch. If you did not see his one-handed catch, I know I'm a little biased because I'm a Texans fan, but this was a great, great catch. Go back, find that catch. It is ridiculous. Heck, if you even want to see it, just say, I want to see the catch. I'll find the link, and I'll send it to you guys as well. 10.7 points in week 1. Literally available in every single league. Remember last year, we had guys like Logan Thomas and Robert Tonyan come out of nowhere. This could be that guy this season. And he's available everywhere. He goes against the Browns in week 2, which, they're not the best in coverage. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah did play quite a bit, so he's an athletic linebacker. I don't think they're going to put him on Pharaoh Brown, but I could be wrong. Keep in mind this name, Pharaoh Brown, is somebody to either stash on the end of your bench, pick up this week, or potentially pick up in the future. You probably don't have to spend very much of your fab budget on him because, like most people, you coming into this video probably didn't know who he was ahead of this video. So you probably only have to spend 1 to 2% of your fab budget on Pharaoh Brown. Some leagues you might even be able to pick him up for free after waivers run, but definitely a name to keep in mind for the tight end position. Then last but not least, we have the defenses. These are defenses that I'm kind of looking to stream this week. So we got the New Orleans Saints. First off, they play the Carolina Panthers. I don't trust Sam Darnold. If he plays against a good defense, he's probably going to turn the ball over. And the New Orleans Saints is rostered in about 30% of leagues between Yahoo and ESPN. And honestly, if they played the way they did against Aaron Rodgers week 1, Sam Darnold doesn't stand a chance. And they're definitely a defense to note moving forward. And they traded for Bradley Roby at cornerback, which is just going to make their cornerback room even deeper. He wasn't able to play week 1 because he was still suspended. But now you got Marshawn Lattimore, you got Bradley Roby, and Paulson Adebo even looked pretty good in week 1 as well. So definitely a room to look out for. Chicago Bears next up, going against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bears were able to get a little bit of pressure on Matt Stafford. If they can do that to Joe Burrow against a weaker offensive line, the Bears could have a nice day. They are rostered in 10% of ESPN leagues, 22% of Yahoo leagues. So there's a good chance that they're out there. Decent streaming matchup if you need one. Green Bay Packers we'll mention real quick. Yeah, they look terrible against Jameis Winston, but they do play against the Detroit Lions this week. Rostered in 26% of ESPN leagues, 22% of Yahoo leagues. So pretty good chance that they're out there. Just kind of temper your expectations since they didn't show much week 1. And then the last two are both under 10% rostered on both ESPN and Yahoo. And it's the New York Giants and the Arizona Cardinals. Starting off with the New York Giants, they go against the Washington football team, who is starting Taylor Heineke at quarterback. So I actually wrote a piece last season mainly looking at COVID and how it could affect defenses, but also how it could affect offenses if they lose their starting quarterback. In doing the research for that article, on average, backup quarterbacks average 6 points less per game than starting quarterbacks, and that was data from the 2019 season. So there's a good chance that the New York Giants defense could be viable in this game. Obviously, we all love Ryan Fitzpatrick when it comes to fantasy football. Obviously, there is a love out there for Taylor Heineke. I hope he does well. He is a former Texan, so I do wish him the best. But it could be a good matchup for the New York Giants in general. Then last but not least, we got the Arizona Cardinals. We saw them look amazing against the Tennessee Titans week 1. Chandler Jones had 5 sacks. I guess he's just trying to prove his point that they should pay him, because he really played like he wanted to get paid. And they go against the Minnesota Vikings offensive line. They didn't look too great against the Cincinnati Bengals in week 1 in terms of pass protection. Christian Darrisaw, their first-round pick, did not play in that game. I don't expect him to play this week either. So don't be surprised if the Arizona Cardinals get some pressure on Kirk Cousins. And when Kirk Cousins gets under pressure, that's when he makes mistakes. But with that being said, that's all I have for the week 1 waivers. If you guys have any questions regarding to waivers at all, please leave them down in the comments. Definitely here to help you guys out the best that I can. And hopefully we get some of these high priority waiver guys if you need them for your team. Hopefully your team's already in very, very good shape and you don't even need most of these players and you can just strengthen the back end of your bench. But I realize that's not the case for everyone. Either way, keep in mind the names listed on this video. If you got any questions about any other names that I didn't have in this video, if you think I missed anyone, just let me know. Definitely here to help you guys out once again. But with that being said, if you are new to my channel, please consider subscribing. Definitely would appreciate it. It helps to build the community that we're trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports, which is truly one for you, the viewers, helping you with your fantasy football teams, helping you with DFS, whether it's NBA or NFL, talking all the NFL news, talking some NFL draft prospects as we get closer to the 2022 NFL draft. And with that being said, if you are a new or current subscriber who's yet to do so, also hit that notification bell down below. It's going to let you know every single time I post up a new video. But with that being said, that's all I have for today's video. Hopefully you all enjoyed. And then last but not least, special little shout out to each and every one of you watching today's video. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. Definitely means a lot to me, and I hope each and every one of you has a great rest of your day.